most people know Pete's journey. So Tokyo Great Olympics came fourth, was really hungry come Paris to go one step better and try to get a medal. We had a few hiccups along the way, and I'm sure most of you know about that. So 2022 was a good year, 7th World Champs, silver at Com Games. 2023, really bad year. We had some setbacks that we would never imagined, but he still came back and ran pretty well. He ran 144.29 and 334.52 from the top of my head. And I've really limited prep because he didn't do a lot in that January, February, March of 2023. Then he went off to some game show in the desert and got injured. So yeah, it wasn't a great year. So 2024, we had big goals for Paris. And I'll just go to the next slide. And this is just an overview of the year and what went wrong, really. So domestic season, we really wanted to target the 8:15 double. That was on the proviso that the 800 wasn't 3 rounds, which has ended up being 3 rounds, because I don't think athletes can do 5 races in 3 days. It's just a little bit much. He really wanted to run that mile at the Melbourne or the Maurie Plant meet and try to get under 3:52. So most of our training was geared towards that mile. So we did a lot more mile pace training than we had done in the past, and we're really gearing towards that. Unfortunately, he hurt his groin in February and missed about 12 days of training. We tried to train through that injury at the start, but it just progressively got worse, and I just threw a bit of a bump in the road. That meant we actually didn't start racing until about 2 weeks before Nationals. So he did the LB Thomas 800. He did a race at Stall in the rain over 1,000 meters, and then we got to Nationals. But our prep for Nationals was pretty well hampered. We only managed 2 800-meter pace sessions in that period, and one of them wasn't that great. It was like, it wasn't up to expectations, that we had done in the past. But he still came away with a good result at Nationals. He ran 145.06, pretty much even paced, and finished second after running what I would deem a really bad tactical race. He got boxed in the back straight, had to push his way out, which I don't agree with that tactics, but it's actually good because I don't think Pete's a very aggressive person. And to see him actually push and fight his way out of a box was something that I was pleased to see, even though I didn't think it was the best tactic to be pushing people. But he finished second. So running 145.06 off interrupted prep, we're pretty happy with that. He then went to the Chinese Diamond League, got COVID on the flight over. We assume it was a flight over because he woke up sick the next day. Had a poor race there, so he missed a few days. Came back to Australia, spent some time with his family in Perth, came back to Melbourne. We got a good week of training in. Then we headed off to Albuquerque, New Mexico. The altitude there is around about 1,650 meters. And we did a really good block of training. But in hindsight, we might have trained too hard because it was really hot there. It was 30 plus every day. Altitude wasn't too high, but 1,650 is still reasonable. And we trained really hard. So my whole group was over there with the American guys as well. And we probably pushed it a little bit hard. And then we went to LA for that race, and everyone raced a little bit flat. So he ran 145.87. So it wasn't a great result considering how well he was training. And we probably traveled too close. We traveled the day before the race, but it wasn't straightforward travel. It was a bit awkward getting from Albuquerque to LA. So that's just things we have to keep in mind. From there, we went over to Atlanta and we put in some really good training. Like the block he had in Albuquerque to Atlanta was the best block of training he's ever had. He'd run numerous PB sessions. He was training with Josh Hoey, who came fourth at the US trials and ran 143.80. And he was, beating him quite comfortably in a number of sessions, not only the 800-meter pace sessions, but even some of the longer, more aerobics sessions, which Josh is, I thought Josh would be better at. So he's going really well. Then we got to June and we had another setback. That article came out about Pete and that screenshot, and he took it really badly. I was staying with him, and he was visibly upset. We got his fiancée to come over. I'm upset about now. He was upset, and it really took him back. He went from being in great shape, in a great mindset, really ready to race well, and it just went all backwards. He got sick just after that. Didn't train for 5 days. I think that was more the stuff that was going on outside the running than the sickness. Then we went to New York for a race, and it's probably the worst race I've ever seen him run. I could tell him warming up. He hardly wanted to warm up. He jogged for about 5 minutes, did 2 strides. I could just tell he didn't want to be there. And his results showed he ran 1:48.41. His training partner Josh came third in that race, ran like 1:45.3, and it was just clear that he didn't really want to be running at that stage. And he flew home back to Australia the next day. So the original plan was to fly from there to Europe, and then we're going to do a training block at altitude up at St. Moritz, but he's went back to Australia. And he actually, I think I spoke to a few people on this call about this, but he actually decided when he flew back to Australia that he wasn't going to go to the Olympics if Luke Boys made the quota. So I know Luke was really close to making the quota, and he thought that, if Luke was going to be in a position to get a spot in the Olympics, he was going to give up his spot to Luke and not go to the Olympics because he really didn't want to run. And during June, he didn't run for 3.5 weeks. Then we sort of worked out that actually Luke wasn't going to make that quota, and Pete had to make up his mind if he wanted to go. So he resumed training on June 27th and just started jogging, and he flew back to Europe early July. But we really were behind the 8 ball there because he had basically a month off of training. And when I say no training, he wasn't running at all. We tried to get him to the gym at the VIS. He might have gone in once, I think, but it was really hard to get him in there. We went to Europe. We tried to make up for that month that we missed, and it probably wasn't. We probably didn't do it successfully. I got on the next slide what we did. I know some coaches like to see the exact training, so put that in there. So we put in there. We tried to mix in some racing with the hard training, so we didn't back off for the races. He ran 1:45.76 like a few days after we got to Europe, but I guess he was really disappointed at the result because his training partner Josh ran 1:43.80. It's always hard when you get smashed by your training partner by 2 seconds. And then the next race there, even though it wasn't fast, we just used that as a heat practice. So we just wanted to win that and just sort of sit comfortably and win that race. So things were going quite well. And then we went to Montpellier. He had a good session there, a good 500-meter session where he ran 60.4 and went through in 46 through the 400. So he was going well, but I just think we didn't really have a chance to get any of those really hard 800-meter sessions that we would have done in that June period, because I think by July it's just a bit late to try add them in. We got to the Olympics and he just ran badly. He was in a good position. I think if I go back one slide, it's actually interesting because these 2 pictures are in a similar spot. This is the Olympic semi-final. This is the heat, but they're both just after 600 meters. So we got in the spot we wanted to, second on the shoulder. We always try to get in the top 2 at 600 meters, so you're in a good spot to kick. So he's in a good spot there, but we just hadn't done the work to hold on. The heat was quite slow, 54.1, and then the rubber charge was 53.2, and he probably moved too hard down the back straight to get into that second position at 600. And because of the lack of change of pace work we've done and lack of 800-meter stuff we've done, he really paid for that in the last 100. So it wasn't a great Olympics there. On this slide, I'm not going to go through this, but this is just basically the last 4 weeks of training. So when we tried to catch up when he came back to Europe, and what I've highlighted is just what I would deem hard sessions. So there's not many in there, and none of them are really that impressive compared to what I've seen Pete do before. And as you can see, we're still trying to, do some training here before races. We wouldn't normally do that leading to a race. We wouldn't normally go that hard if we were racing on Saturday, but we had to do that just because we were falling a bit behind. So for us, wasn't a great Olympics. Some of the stuff that happened was out of our control. I had a thing on the other side that we always talk about, a happy athlete is a performing athlete. And I just know from experience when Pete's happy, he performs well. He wasn't happy in this period in June. He was, depressed, sad, didn't want to run, hated athletics, and his results showed through it. Thankfully now he seems to have turned the corner. He recently had a baby. That's the other thing that was going on. His fiancée was pregnant, and it's just a distraction that he wasn't prepared for. So that was Pete's journey. Some of the other stuff I saw in Europe. So I was lucky because I had a 4-week or 3.5-week period that I was in Europe on my own. I had my family with me, but I had no athletes because Pete was back in Australia. I had these grand plans of, a training camp. It just fell through. So I reached out to Avish and I went up to St. Moritz because I'd never been there before, and I just wanted to check out what it was all about. And so if I ever sent athletes up there, I'd know exactly what I was talking about. So I'll go through some of the things I saw. So at the Olympics, I tried to think about who would make the final of the men's and women's 800, and I watched them all warm up and took notes. The one thing that stood out being about Kelly Hodgkinson, it was that she did the exact same warm up, exact same drills, same runs over cones, everything exactly the same in the exact same spot for the heat, semi, and final, and nothing changed. She didn't have any more intensity in the heat, semi, or final. It was all just very businesslike and routine, and I really like that. Likewise, well, not likewise, but opposite, I watched Maura warm up, and she did not start jogging until 16 minutes before the call room and did no strides whatsoever. And she seemed, I don't know if she was injured or what was going on, but that was different to what she had done for the heat and the semi. And again, the two guys that came first and second, the 800 meter final, did the exact same warm up. But Rob started his jog from the exact same spot for the heat, semi, and final, and did the same amount of strides and everything. And then one thing I did notice with Shajati was that there seemed to be a lot more intent in his warm up for the final. He was doing his strides a lot harder. He did his pre-race, blowout, whatever you want to call it, primer, a lot harder than he was doing for the heats. So one thing I noticed is that the guys and girls who run really well stick to a planned routine for their warm up. Tactics, and I guess I let it in a bit with that question to you, Gav, but I just think we as coaches need to really plan for these finals and how to make the Olympics. So I put there, 6 of 8 finalists has already won 142 before Olympics. The slowest guy in the final, his PB was 143.88, and he ran 142 in the final. There was 4 142 guys that didn't make the final. So we as athletes and coaches, we need to just make sure that we get better and we're consistently better. We can't think that we're going to produce some at the Olympics that we've never produced before. We have to produce it consistently before the Olympics. Other thing I just noted just with tactics was, in 2025, the World Champs is going to have 3 semi-finals, and it's the first 3 in each semi, and no fastest losers. So we've just got to think about what the tactics will be for that. So in the heats, or the 3 semis for the men's, the first 2 semis were 145 races, and then the third race was really quick. All the fastest qualifiers came through. So my gut feel is that the semis at the World Champs aren't going to be that fast. They're going to be that 145 type race, and we need to have our athletes prepared to run 145 off a 52.5 first lap and be in good positions, because we can't kick from the back, like Gav said, and expect to get around these guys because they're very good. And then I put that last dot point there because Avish and I had a robust discussion on Saturday, and just talk about, practice different ways of racing, and should we move away from having pacemakers during our domestic season and practice racing each other? Because as Avish pointed out, the fastest race of last year was our national final, where Luke ran 144.74, and there was no rabbits there. So it's just an interesting idea. I'm not wedded either way. And then the other thing I noticed, I think Simon's on this call, when I went up to St. Moritz, I was just shocked by how switched on Jess was for this Olympic Games. And I think that was maybe 9 weeks out when I was up there, because it was around about June 30th. I think I watched her do a session down in Kiev. But she was so switched on. She was training incredibly hard. She was really focused. And I put here, she was doing everything right, like the recovery in between sessions. She wasn't going out for sightseeing. It's really tricky in St. Moritz because you get this pass and you can go on chairlifts and go up and see the mountains and stuff. And I know some athletes were going up on the chairlifts multiple times. So it's really hard. You got to prepare your athletes for that. And she wasn't spending hours in the coffee shop. That might be good for some people, but she wasn't doing that. She was just training hard, eating well, and recovering in between each session. So I just think when I saw that, I thought maybe that's exactly what an athlete needs to do to medal. And she did medal. So maybe it is. Not every athlete wants to live a life that way. But I think if we want to be the best in the world, we have to start thinking and getting our athletes to think that way as well.
Justin, maybe it's related to that sort of running fast times consistently. Obviously, this year was a bit of a pretty big change for the men's 800, and I heard you speak about this previously about how you probably thought the way to run a fast 800 time was you need to go out harder in the first lap, but most of those sub 142s this year were a little more evenly paced. With that in mind, do you change your training or do you just change your race approach if you're trying to run one of these faster times?
Yeah, I think it's just changing the race approach. So I spoke to like Adrian Tual, oh, not Adrian Tual, that's his brother, but Gabriel Tual, spoke to a Rob and just asked them, had they changed anything in their training to get these new results? And they all came back, they all said the same thing. They hadn't changed anything. They just believed the races had changed. So I don't think we need to change our training, but just need to be more aware of how the races are run and making sure we know, our athletes know how to employ that. I think like you look at the men's 1500, women's 1500, the pattern's kind of been the same for the last few years. Everyone knows how Inga Britson's going to run. Everyone knows how Faith is going to run. So I think they train for that. This year, the event really shifted and it caught some people by surprise, me, for example. But I think next year we'll know what we're looking at and know what we need to do so we can prepare for that better. But yeah, 800 definitely took a jump this year.